If you're an ESL teacher, you're gonna talk about food sometime, but maybe you've never talked about food like this. Let me show you my American food culture ESL plan and lay it out step by step. Let's just jump in. First off, we're going to start off with a warm-up. A good warm-up gets students thinking about what they already know and what they don't know in English, and it gets them speaking English right from the beginning. So I start off by asking the students, what do Americans really eat? Is it just hamburgers, pizza, and steak? Of course not. But what do we eat? You tell me. So I will have the students team up or pair up and fill out a chart. Now, you don't have to pass this out. I just put this on the screen behind me. So I'll have a chart, a table that just has every day of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and it also has breakfast, lunch, and dinner running across the top. So students have a chance to write in breakfast for Monday, breakfast for Tuesday, lunch for Monday, lunch for Tuesday. And I encourage them to use their phones if they're not sure about a translation, or they can also look up different foods online as well. After a couple of minutes, after students have filled in their chart, then I ask the students to just call out their ideas and I write them onto the PowerPoint and we fill in the chart together. And it's really such a fun, engaging activity. Students are learning different vocabulary from each other, but the fun part is I don't tell them if they are correct. I just take all of their information, I write it into the chart, then I tell them, at the end of class, we're going to find out how accurate your weekly menu is. Now, this lesson is a little bit different from a typical food lesson. Instead of having the students do a lot of work with the language themselves, this is more of a culture lesson, which requires me to speak a lot more than I usually would in an ESL lesson. But after we've made the menu and we've done the warm-up, I tell the students that we're going to talk about what American food culture really is, and there are a few things that they need to know. Number one, they need to remember that America is an immigrant nation. What does that mean? That means that people from all over the world moved to America to start their lives there. And when they moved, they brought their own language, they brought their own culture, and they also brought their own food. So what is American food? American food is food from all over the world. During this part, I also have a map of America and I use it to indicate where some people generally moved to. For example, in California and in Texas, you're going to have a lot of Spanish or Mexican influences. In the Northeast, you're going to have a lot of Irish and Italian influences. In the middle, like in Kentucky and Tennessee, you're actually having a lot of English influences. And in places like Minnesota and Wisconsin, you have a lot of German influences. Then we go through all the food from different countries. So I start with Italian food and I ask them if they know any Italian foods like pizza, pasta. We also have a ton of Mexican food in the country. So we'll eat things like tacos, chips and salsa, burritos. And here I'm not focusing on super traditional, super authentic Italian food or super authentic Mexican food. Instead, I'm focusing on the things that a lot of Americans all over the country would be familiar with. I would say everyone in America is familiar with a taco and everyone in America is familiar with spaghetti. We talk about German food, sausages, hamburgers, hot dogs, pretzels. We talk about Japanese food, sushi, Thai food, Korean food, Indian food, and even Chinese food because I'm teaching in China. So I give them a couple of examples of foods that really did come from other countries, but are very, very common in America. So maybe our menu even looks something like this. Monday for dinner, Italian food. Tuesday, tacos. Wednesday, German food. Thursday, Vietnamese food. Friday, Japanese food. That could be possible. Now, the second thing to remember about American food is that when people brought their food to America, the flavor changed. And I asked the students, do you think the flavor stayed the same when they brought it from their country? And they all immediately go, oh, no, we don't think the flavor stayed the same. And I asked them, why do you think the flavor changed? There are a couple of reasons for this. Maybe it changed because of culture. Maybe it changed because It needed to fit an American palate. Maybe it changed simply because different ingredients are available in different places. For example, the California roll was invented with avocado because we didn't have some of the fish that was available in Japan. In America, we have spaghetti and meatballs, but Italians wouldn't put meat and pasta in the same dish together. And it's fun to remind the students that even if they go to an American restaurant in China, the flavor is probably not going to taste the same. The third thing I talk about is truly American food. Now, just because America is an immigrant nation, does that mean that America doesn't have its own food? Of course not. We do have foods that were invented in America, and we also have foods that we think of as very quintessentially American. So a couple of things that were invented in America, California roll, which we already mentioned, chocolate chip cookies, potato chips, peanut butter, even cornbread. And I like to talk about cornbread because cornbread is thousands of years old, according to some historians, which is a good reminder too for students that even though America as a political country has only been around for a couple of hundred years, there were people living in America long before America became the country that it is today. The fourth thing we talk about is traditional food or holiday food. So I asked the students about what foods do we consider to be a celebratory food, a traditional food during a holiday. These are the foods that we eat. So I asked the students now, because I've been talking for a while, I want to give them a chance to use their English here. I tell the students to write down a list of the foods that they think we eat for number 1, the 4th of July, number 2, Thanksgiving, and number 3, Christmas. Again, they can use their phones to help them translate, or they can use it to look up some things and search some information online. I want my students to get into the habit of discovering the language for themselves, searching for things when they don't know the answers. So for 4th of July, this is where we eat hamburgers and hot dogs. We grill outside. We have everything red, white, and blue. And we have red, white, and blue desserts. This is also where I like to talk about hamburgers because, at least for my students, they are under the impression that Americans will eat hamburgers like every day. I'll usually ask the students, how often do you think we eat hamburgers? And the most common answers are either every day, or they'll say something like 3 or 4 times a week. And I think for a lot of people, that's not true. For some people it might be, but for a lot of people, that's not true. For Thanksgiving, we'll eat things like turkey, cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes, sweet potato casserole, stuffing. For Christmas, we might have a ham, we might have peppermint things, we have Christmas cookies, and it's fun to talk about these things that are part of the holiday celebration. The fifth thing I talk about is different parts of the country. I tell my students that not every place in America is exactly the same. Now, can you find a McDonald's everywhere? Of course you can, but you can find a McDonald's everywhere in China as well. So if you go to America and you only visit California, you're going to have a different food experience than if you go to America and you only stay in Pennsylvania. So we talk a little bit about that as well. I separate the country into 4 main parts. In the north, we have a lot of seafood like lobster roll and clam chowder. We have things like New York pizza, New York cheesecake. In the south, we have a lot of southern cooking, grits, chicken and waffles, fried okra. In the Midwest, there's a lot of barbecue. There's Chicago deep dish pizza. If we move to the west, we have a lot of fresh food because the weather in California is so great. You've got Tex-Mex. You have a lot of Asian influences in California as well. Another really fun aspect of food I like to talk about is Cajun food. So we have things like jambalaya and gumbo, and students are usually kind of shocked because that food is actually kind of similar to Chinese food in a lot of ways. And so it's really fun to show them the different styles of food they've never seen before, and also reiterate to them that America is not completely homogenous. If you're moving to different areas around the country, you might discover different foods. It's finally time to see how accurate the students' weekly menu was. So I will bring back up the menu that we all created together, and I will go through it one by one and say yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. You know, if they've written hamburgers 3 times on the menu, we gotta get some of those hamburgers out. Let's include some other things. Let's add in some sushi nights. Let's add in some taco nights. But then I will also give them an example of some of the common foods that we eat. You know, for breakfast, we might have cereal or waffles or pancakes or oatmeal or yogurt and fruit. We might have scrambled eggs and bacon. And we also talk about this a little bit as well. Do we have bacon every single day? Probably not. That might be a little bit unhealthy. You know, do we make pancakes from scratch every single morning? No, that takes too much time. We also talk a little bit about lunch as well. I feel like a lot of Americans will have like a soup, a salad, a sandwich for lunch. And for dinner, maybe we'll have some meat and some vegetables and a starch like potatoes or pasta. Or maybe we'll do something like Chinese food or Japanese food or Thai food or Mexican food. And as we're going through all of this, we'll talk about the culture as well. And you can compare this to whatever culture you are teaching it. Now in China, it's really unusual to have a cold, light lunch. Usually lunches are hot and definitely a lot bigger. Why? Well, China has a longer lunch break. Most places have about 2 hours for lunch. So you have enough time to really sit down, have a hot meal, enjoy your time, and a lot of Chinese people will take a nap after they eat as well. Whereas most people in America have really short lunch breaks. For me, when I was in college, I had a 30-minute lunch break. With only 30 minutes, I just want to grab something quick like a sandwich or a salad and be on my way. If I ate a ton of food at lunch, I might feel really sleepy for the rest of the afternoon and I don't have time to take a nap. So you can also talk about some of the cultural differences that come up as well. Usually, this is where I end the lesson, but if you have more time, you could also talk about some other things as well. For example, manners. I'll ask the students, do you know any things that are considered rude or impolite for American table manners? So in America, it's considered rude if you slurp your food, which might not be the same in other cultures. In America, you should never reach for something across the table. You should ask for someone to hand it to you. If you're passing the salt and pepper, you should pass it together. A lot of my students have questions about tipping as well because tipping is not common in China. So we talk about where you tip. You know, you're gonna tip at a sit-down restaurant, but you won't really tip at fast food. How much should you tip? And we'll also practice together. So I'll show them a picture of a menu on the screen, and if we order, let's say we order the beef for $20, you know, how much would we pay for tip? How much would the total be if there's tax on the food as well? Let me give you a few ideas for homework as well. One really fun homework assignment is to just have students go online and watch a video about American food. When they watch the video, you can have them write down some vocabulary words that they used. You could also tell them to get ready to talk with their partner next week about it, and they'll talk with their partner about the things that they saw. Another thing you could do is you could have students revise the menu that they created and to make it a little bit more accurate. You could have students do some searching online and write down one food that they would really like to try if they could go to America. You could also have students write a few sentences comparing and contrasting their food culture with American food culture. And like I said, I am American, so this lesson is about American food culture, but you could certainly adapt it to fit whatever culture that you are from. I hope this was helpful. I absolutely love talking about food. I do have a whole lesson that's all about general food ideas, but if you want to do something a little bit different, this is such a fun lesson. I've never not had students enjoy this cultural lesson. They find it interesting because it's just different from a lot of the other food lessons they've done before. They're not sitting with their partner, being a waiter and being a customer at a restaurant. They're actually learning some cultural things. They're being introduced to some new food. I also love using this lesson as a bonus lesson or as an extra lesson if you just need something else to add to your syllabus. If you have any questions or if you have any ideas about anything that I should add to this lesson plan, just leave them in the comments down below. You can check out atlasteaching.com for more ideas and tips and inspiration. You can also check back here for weekly videos. That's all all for today. Enjoy talking about food. Bye.